So, welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing, and we'll be covering verses 77 and 78. Type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite version of verse 77.
Want to do that?
Yeah. You have to go down the chat.
I'll go ahead and say, Brian, you can go ahead and Penny could read.
Yeah.
Since I can hear you're unmuted, so.
I forgot that. All right. I'm going to read this time. Stephen Mitchell.
Great.
As it acts in the world, the Tao is like the bending of a bow. The top is bent downward, the bottom is bent up. It adjusts excess and deficiency so that there is perfect balance. It takes from what is too much and give to what isn't enough. Those who try to control, who use force to protect their power, go against the direction of the Tao. They take from those who don't have enough and give to those who have far too much. The master can keep giving because there is no end to her wealth. She acts without expectation, succeeds without taking credit, and doesn't think that she is better than anyone else.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, we have my good friend, Evanik.
Thank you, Joe. Number 77, this is from God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading of Dao De Jing. The Tao of heaven is like the stringing of a bow. The high is pressed down and the low is raised up. The string that is too long is shortened, and the string that is too short is added to. Heaven's way is to take from what has too much and give to what does not have enough. That is not the way of human beings, however. For they take from those who have too little to increase the wealth of the rich. So who is it that has too much and it offers it to a needy world? Only someone who knows the Tao. Therefore, the sage works anonymously. She achieves great things, but does not wait around for praise. She does not want her talents to attract attention to her.
Thank you, Evanik. Next up, we have David, followed by Margarita.
Yes, I'll read the thing in English. The Tao of heaven is like the bending of a bow. The high is lowered and the low is raised. If the string is too long, it is shortened. If there is not enough, it is made longer. The Tao of heaven is to take from those who have too much and give to those who do not have enough. Man's way is different. He takes from those who do not have enough to give to those who already have too much. What man has more than enough and gives it to the world? Only the man of the Tao. Therefore, the sage works without recognition. He achieves what has to be done without dwelling on it. He does not try to show his knowledge.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Margarita. Please type exclamation point in chat if you'd like to read your favorite version of verse 77.
I will read in Bahasa. Dao mengurangi yang lebih dan menambah yang kurang. Hukum alam seperti orang membentang busur panah. Bila ketinggian diturunkan sedikit, bila kerendahan dinaikkan sedikit. Mengurangi yang kelebihan dan menambah yang kekurangan. Hukum alam mengurangi yang kelebihan dan menambah yang kekurangan. Tapi hukum manusia tidak demikian. Manusia mengurangi yang sudah kurang dan menambah yang sudah kelebihan. Siapakah yang setelah memiliki kelebihan akan memberikan pada sesamanya? Ia adalah orang yang sudah mencapai Tao. Maka orang bijak bekerja dengan tidak mengharapkan buah dari pekerjaannya, berjasa dengan tidak mengakui pahala, dan tidak memperlihatkan diri sebagai orang bijaksana. That's it. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Margarita. If there are no other exclamation points, no one else wanting to read their favorite version of verse 77, I'm actually going to go ahead and read the Ursula Le Guin version, and then we'll go to you, Jason, if that's okay with you. Thank you. The bow. The way of heaven is like a bow bent to shoot. Is top end brought down, its lower end raised up. It brings the high down, lifts the low, takes from those who have, gives to those who have not. Such is the way of heaven, taking from people who have, giving to people who have not. Not so the human way. It takes from those who have not to fill up those who have. Who has enough to fill up everybody? Only those who have the way. So the wise do without claiming, achieve without asserting, wishing not to show their worth. So, okay, thank you, everyone. And with that, we will move to Jason's version.
Okay, so I will assume this chapter is much easier than all of them. So just like before we talk about in Dao De Jing, Lao Tzu like to use the daily life as an example. So here is another case, right? You use the drawing a ball. Okay, so that's pretty common in the government. So the Tao of heaven is like drawing a ball, lowering that which is high, raising that which is low. The Tao of heaven decreases the excess and fears the deficiency. The Tao of people is not the same. It decreases the deficiency and supply the excess. Who can supply the excess to the world? Only those who have the Tao. Therefore, the sage work without flaunting, achieve without taking credit. He doesn't want to bear the name of excellence. He doesn't want to bear the exalted name. I think it's the last stanza about, I think it's the fourth time show up, okay, the same message. The sage works without flaunting, achieves without taking credit. He doesn't want to bear the name of excellence. Okay, so this sentence in this chapter, probably the fourth time talking about. So just like to mention, that's the fourth time, and I'm not sure the last stanza is really match with the rest of the text or not. Some people think about the last stanza doesn't belong here because it's redundant, but that's up to you how you want to understand this chapter. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So, Aman, would you like to make some comments regarding verse 77?
Just a couple of quick ones.
Sure.
What Jason was saying about the last stanza not belonging there is something that is argued over. There are some who say it belongs as the first stanza to the next chapter, and others who think it's simply a misprint entirely. There's something almost, I don't want to say beautiful, but as I've been going through this and as I've been toying with this idea of who are you communicating to and why are you appealing to them in this way, a good bow would be a daily tool, but it would also be sort of the 30-06 of its day. It'd be something that would appeal on a visceral level to a young, war-hungry princeling, that it's like, hey, the Tao is like a bow. Really? Now you've got my attention. And then twists that very common image of a tool of war, a tool of elite warcraft, into something quite poetic and quite universal to be understood. The metaphor here communicates to anyone who's ever seen a bow and arrow used in any way. I think this is one of the more self-explanatory ones. And I also, just to break our arms patting each other on the back, I think Jason and we're getting pretty good at this as we're getting near the end. So it's getting easier to both anticipate and, make little suggestions here and there without sort of testing the waters. So I've enjoyed this. I will miss it. I'm not going to grieve prematurely either. I'm glad we got a couple more weeks before it's all said and done. And hopefully that gives me an appropriate amount of time for the remainder. But yes, thank you all.
Well, I think I speak for most of us when I say that we noticed that you got pretty good with it a long time ago. Yes, this has been I don't want to grieve prematurely either. It's hard enough going through these things. So one question I would pose before we turn to Madeline, and folks, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat for your takeaways regarding verse 77. And is this distinction between the way in heaven and the way in human for humans? Like, what is that's the first time I've kind of seen it put this way, at least in my version, the way of heaven as an approach, as opposed to the way being the approach. Did I miss something along the lines, along the way here that's used in other places?
I think there's actually a couple of references to the Tao of Heaven, but not necessarily as in stark contrast to the Tao of people or the way of people. It is kind of jarring because there is a sentiment that people's natural tendency is to be harmonious to the way, and it's the social structures that corrupt or distort that or lead people astray. And in this chapter, this late in the game, as it were, you get almost a declaration that that sounds as if, or intimates that this has now become the way of people, to be in an antithesis to the natural way or the way of heaven or the Tao writ large. So I think what you're picking up on there is a slight note of despair that people are not reverting back to their natural state. They're not reverting to a healthy, harmonious way. This has now become the way of people. Kind of like being resigned to being in traffic and realizing, well, this is the way of getting to where I'm going. There's just nothing for it at this point. It may not be a fixed state of affairs, but it may feel like a fixed state of affairs by that point.
Thank you, Aman. Madeline, you're up next, and followed by, I don't see. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat if you would like to share your takeaways from verse 77. But Madeline, please, by all means.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I think I am just going to stay in denial because this is how Tuesday evenings are. And I'm not giving up on it. It's been so wonderful. What I'm seeing two differences between the last part and the main body of the chapter. One is that most of it feels as if most of it is talking about material goods. And then the latter part suddenly seems to be talking about spirituality. Since the first part seems to be about material things, money, taxes, food, things like that, political favors. And then all of a sudden we're over there to the Taoist sage, who may not be someone who's overflowing with material wealth. And that last part reminded me of, I think it's from Shuang Shu. I'm not sure. It's a story about the sage. He's visiting an emperor, and the emperor says, you know, you're so wise. This is such a hassle. I'd like you to be emperor in my place. And the sage says, no, I don't want that name. And so what I'm learning is that in Chinese philosophy, there are actualities and there are names. Actualities would correspond to what we call substance in Western philosophy, and names would be universals or ideals, Plato's forms. So I think that here at the end, it may have been transplanted from that other story, but it seems like here at the end, the sage is saying, not just that I don't want to be known by the name of excellent, but that I don't want to, I don't even want to fit into that abstract category. I don't want to limit myself by fitting into that abstract category.
Wonderful comments. Thank you. So next up, I have Evanique, followed by Douglas, then Brian and Margarita. Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Madeline. The one thing I was thinking about this is, someone said in the previous meetup that the Tao is a progression of the prince or the person being counseled from a young man, and then traveling through his life. So now we're in chapter 77, which I imagine, since we're at the end, almost at the end, which does make me sad a little bit, but even though we're at the end, it seems like this is him being counseled as a mature man. And so with looking at that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that you're kind of getting a look at your life, right? Like, he's lived a little bit, he has a little bit of experience, and now he's wondering, like, what is it all for, right? Like, kind of like most people do, like when they become middle-aged, or, I mean, sometimes people do it in their 20s, I shouldn't say that, but, you get to a point where you're like, okay, what is this for? What am I here for, right? And then, so, and at this point, I imagine that this prince has gathered up a great amount of wealth for himself. And he's like, well, what more can I gather? What more can I gain? And then that's when he's going into, the spirituality of it is, following the way of the Tao means you don't worry about those things. It's like going deeper and going to the center and a core of who you are. And I like the line where it says that, like, where he talks about, this is not the way of human beings, however, for they take from those who have little to increase the wealth of the rich. So, and the reason why I kind of like that is because it just shows, at what point do you have enough? At what point, like materially, do you have enough? When are you going to go deeper? When are you going to search for more? If you're going to follow the way of the Tao or spirituality, you realize you don't need that. And then you kind of start going the opposite way. You see it with philanthropists and people like that who have had fun. They've had all the things. And now they're like, well, what more is it? And then they get more from giving it away, or, like you even see, I saw a documentary from Bill Gates where he was trying to learn how to get indoor plumbing. He was trying to figure out how to rid Africa of malaria. And he realized it was just as simple as indoor plumbing. So how do you do that? How do you set that up? And that's what he's doing. And I think that's where this is going. It's like, okay, you can keep being a human being and keep gathering and storing up for yourself that you can't keep. Or you can just follow the way of the Tao and figure out how you can make the world better for everybody. It's a choice, and it's not even like a good or bad choice. It's just a choice. And like, how do you want to fulfill yourself? So that's what I got out of it.
I think that's the main point, is that the further away from the Tao that we get, the more that we seem to want for ourselves. Versus it, the closer to the Tao, we start to see what is meaningful and what is enough. Just how to temper our own emotions, temper our own desires, and to understand the people around us. So, great comments, Avanique. Next up, I have Douglas.
Yeah, thank Joe. Thank you for your friendship. Appreciate it. Okay. And I would say what this taught me a lot is to go with the flow. Don't let things bother you. Be under emotional control. So what he's trying to say and everything. And then I looked at it from when I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. When I'm tired, I'll sleep. And then, when I need to put my shoes on, I'll put my shoes on. So it's kind of like, kind of that we should not worry about things. We should go, let things, go in their own situation. Although I'm in a nursing home and I have a broken arm that I'm fixing now, I wound up with a broken arm. Not an arm, maybe a finger. Okay. So, but that's it with this whole thing is basically showing people how they can live a better life. And if people can get that flowing, and about Alan Watts, who was a friend of mine, very close friend, he used to say, we have to go. He loved Taoism. One of his favorites was Taoism. Okay, well, all the stuff was bringing Zen and everything else, but Taoism to him was a favorite. So that is pretty much it. But I think it teaches people how to respond to different things and so on. And it's taught me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Douglas. Unfortunately, my internet froze there for a minute, so I didn't get everything, but I did catch most of what you shared, and I appreciate your comments very much. With that, we will move on to Brian or Penny.
Yeah, okay, sorry. The when I read through this, I was trying to think back into the context when it was written, the Warring States, and maybe even what was viewed as the past back then, or what was remembered from the past. I wasn't first struck by the idea of a bow as an instrument of war. I think that's a good that's probably the immediate context here. And Amon made good sense with that and some of the others. But I thought of it, a bow as for hunting. And in fact, I think most people agree who looked back at this, there's a big difference in societies that I think might be reflected in this verse. Kind of a nostalgia for the past, a big difference in the hunter-gatherer societies and the agricultural-based societies, maybe both of which existed to some extent or existed in the immediate past back then in China. In the hunter-gatherer societies, people tended to share freely from when they had too much. I think that's been pretty well established, both by anthropologists and archaeologists. And even philosophers in the past, like John Locke, asserted that would probably be true, and it's kind of proven out because what the hunter-gatherer catches, and hunts is perishable. And so the hunter was kind of like the local hero for the moment. And if you're consistently the best hunter, then you become your status increases, you become a leader. But it comes through sharing these perishable items. And then when we switched to as more and more agriculture began and husbandry, animal husbandry, then people weren't sharing from so much from what they had. They were keeping what they had. And the idea in the hunter-gatherer was, first of all, I think the key thing was that the items are very perishable, but there was some element of luck or chance involved in catching the animal and cooperation amongst the hunters. As more and more there was farming, there's less and less a feeling of chance and more a feeling that you've earned this crop through your effort. And these things evolved over time, but less and less group effort and more individual effort. And people were inclined to claim credit for what they had grown. And that's illustrated even in the very first writings. And the very first writings were warehouse receipts from when people deposited their grain in temples.
Mhm.
So you're giving credit for what you had given to into the temple economy. So I don't know, that's what struck me, and that how there's just two very different kind of views of life. And it struck me and then kind of what Madeline says, this we're very much into the agricultural kind of, I earned it myself and I keep it sort of mentality, with all of its, I think, obvious drawbacks. So that was my reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for those comments. I mean, I very much appreciate the distinction between the hunter-gatherer and the agricultural society, especially once you start to be able to store food for long periods of time. The ability to share is, it becomes a little bit easier. And so storing more than you actually need has a whole lot more meaning in that context. If you're hoarding food, and we did speak about hoarding, I believe, last week in particular. So that's a really important distinction to understand at that particular moment in time. I don't know if Jason or Ramon have a really quick comment maybe about any additional information they may have about that, but if not, we have people in the queue.
I could say very briefly that I 100% agree with Brian, and I do think that is the idealism that he was looking back towards, and I think that's universally there's an element of that in people that hearken to a better age. They think of those smaller tribal bands that were more egalitarian. The irony, of course, is that right around the time, this was a little before the Warring States and the Springs and Autumns time, which is only different in that there were more states fighting, not less. There were also quote unquote barbarian hordes that sort of existed on the periphery of China proper. And most of those societies were still much more pastoral, not necessarily hunter-gatherer, but not agriculturalist, possibly slight horticulturalist. And the very notion of them being barbarian had to do with the fact of exalting the civilization that surrounded the Chinese people within China proper, within those cities, and how vastly superior this agricultural lifestyle was. That sort of urban chauvinism existed then, and I think still exists within degrees throughout the world now. You're much harder pressed to find, immediate return hunter-gatherer societies today. But when you do find them, you do find these egalitarian cultures. And what Brian was saying about, elevating the status of the highest hunter or the most successful hunter, there is one particular tribe in Zimbabwe, and their name escapes me at the moment, but they make a concerted point of chiding a successful hunter by saying, "You drug us all the way out here to pick up this flimsy corpse." They belittle his find. And when asked about this, they said, "You have to do this with young hunters so that they don't think too highly of themselves and don't get too big for their boots. Everyone knows it'll be done. Everyone knows that it's good, but you can't let some boy's head grow bigger than their eyes," is how they put it. And so there is sort of a control mechanism within those societies to keep that egalitarian status, even if somebody excels within a certain skill set.
Thank you, Aman. And with that, we will appreciate you clarifying this comment. And next up, I want to say we have Margarita. I was going to call on you, Brian, again, because it was such a good comment, but I'm going to go to Margarita just out of pure respect.
Okay. Actually, what I feel from this chapter is this week we have this discussion about how unnatural we've become human. Even we need to be reminded to normalize natural things. So it seems that we have the ability to understand the law of nature. However, we also have the determinism to deviate from the law of nature. We have both. So in my department meeting, we talk about how to. I don't mind. I don't mean to make any notion that will negatively impact anyone, but this is just my personal reflection about that department. So that time we were talking about how to empower women who come into menopause, and it struck me because why we need to empower. Well, we realized that in this modern world now, we tend to medicalize aging symptoms. So when we have problems because we are following the law of nature, we seek for help, we seek for treatment and treat that as if that is an illness. So, and that makes me realize that, wow, we need to be reminded that it's something natural. Sometimes we just have to accept it. Then why we have become like this? What happened to our life that we become so unnatural? So yeah, that's why I think about what is enough, just like Evanik say, when is knowledge is enough, or we tend to reduce something that we're not supposed to. So yeah, I think this is what I feel from this. And we need to realize that it's not just happening in the past, but sometimes maybe we're doing it to ourselves. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. Next up, we have Kevin, followed by Madeline.
Thank you, Joe. I will start with your question. The code Dao of Sky Tian. I would say that's a specific word should we use. We should use, and our sky. If we use heaven, then we're going to it's only reserved for a religion side. Anyway, then it's chapter 25. I'm quickly, the last one is saying, man follows the way of earth. The earth follow the ways of sky. Sky follow the way of Dao. Dao follows its own way on nature. If it directly translates nature or 自然, I see here if going to use two. One is I'm trying is the Dao of Tian, the Dao of human. So human I would say society practice. what's the Dao? To give one example, what's Tie Dao? Look at the how bow. If two used too full powered, then you lose a little bit. If you too high, lower a little bit. So that's one example. Then they summarize. They also in the middle paragraphs use the Dao of sky disease, the excess, then fill up the deficiency. So it's basically if the extra share with others, and that's one from the Dao of sky, and from people practice, the Dao of human or Dao of society is not like that. So we are doing is decreases the deficiency and supply to excess. Basically, if you use the modern terms, we're going to use rich get richer and poor get poor. So if we use one from Tie Dao, use sun, how the rotation during the day. In the morning, going up, the noon, the full. Then the job to slowly move away during the downtime. So, and the last chapter, see, if we people practice that way, we're going to keep decrease the deficiency. Basically, the poor people going to support those richer, get richer. Can we follow the Dao of sky? Because if it's too full, we need to lower it. So here, who can do it? Sage. So we need a sage doing this. One typical is called 功成名就 is one. 功成而不吃不处. But it's not hold. Achieve it based Jason translation. Achieve it, but without take credit. We're going to share our credit, share our wealthy, share our wisdom and creativity, share our pattern with the world. The last one is they also it's you talk about it's connected to the stage doing that. If I'm rich, I'm going to share with poor. That's and also I try hold my wisdom. The last one, 其不欲戒邪. I don't want to bear the my smartness, I would say, Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have JP, followed by Madeline, but then if not, I might pose a question. Brian, again, I have a question that I would like to pose to everyone about how this still applies today. Go ahead, JP.
Good evening. I hear everybody talking how this is ending, but I only started myself a few weeks ago. Can't we start again?
Oh, I tell you what, if you sign up for it, we'll have to consider it. So
I like what everybody's saying. There's a balance going on here. A lot of this has already been said before. It might have been Ebonique, if I said the name right, who talked about the progression going on. Here we are, chapter 77. I'm going to add something that's not in this verse, but what I'm getting from the very beginning is, here's a bow. We pull the bow. It's going to lower, it's going to raise. Just like heaven and earth are doing, just like I talked before in other chapters about bellows and the strong and the light and the long and the short always balancing out. Because if I use a bow, I'm going to have an intention. I'm going to aim for something. How much do I really want? How far do I need to shoot? Because that's what the bow and arrow is going to do. There's the law of nature. And I have to follow that as a human. How much am I going to get in abundance? How much am I going to give away? How much is heaven giving to me to have on the earth as a choice to take so that I can give it away? So I think this is developing towards the end of all 81 to consider what the intention is now that we're putting into the practice, because we are going to go out there and use a bow and arrow, maybe for war, maybe for food, but there's the balance that's going on. Maybe we can understand. Thank you.
wonderful comments. JP. Wonderful comments, especially with the bringing in the idea of intention in this whole into the conversation is really important, because it's really understanding where you're aiming, understanding what is enough, understanding what is necessary for other people. That also takes a lot of internal work as well, that you really have to understand yourself, and then therefore you can start to understand other people. And I think that that's a really, and so you move forward with intention. We've talked about this in several of our meetups here. So a wonderful point about being intentional, not even, not only using the metaphor of the arrow, but being intentional where we're aiming. It's a critical point when we're talking about this particular verse. So thank you, my friend. So who did I have next? I believe I had Madeline next. Unless Aman, do you have a comment? Do you want it? Okay.
I don't like stepping on toes, but something JP just said struck a memory chord of the writer is using the bow as a analogy to the way of the heavens, the way of nature. And there is something very poignant there in that the example is in the bow being drawn, and a drawn bow is the perfect metaphor of potentiality. It is unrealized yet potentiality, which is something that is the very quintessence of what the Tao is. And I'm doing it again, trying to say what the Tao is. But if the Tao is anything, it is this field of fertile void, of unlimited potential, of something not yet becoming, but just on the cusp of becoming. That is what the Tao is, and this bow presents that metaphor almost perfectly.
I also like those comments as well, and I appreciate that with the idea of potentiality. And I actually had something had come to my mind that will come back to me in a moment while you were speaking, but we'll go to Madeline first. See, Madeline, chivalry is dead. I let Amon go before you, so.
That's all right. Thank you, Kevin. I loved what JP said about the bellows. I had forgotten about the bellows, and yes, Aman, yes, it's all your fault. I loved what you said about the bellows. I love to think of us, everything in the world here between, sort of inside this bellows that's moving. It's this sort of extremely large and at the same time a very sort of secure and held feeling, in contrast to like reading the news. What Brian said reminded me of something I read recently. It was about when the French first came to North America. They had a lot of contact with the Huron Indians. And the French wrote down a lot of these conversations. The Huron were stunned that there were people in France who were hungry. They couldn't understand how you could possibly see someone who was hungry and not just give them food so they wouldn't be hungry. My main question that I originally had put my hand up for was, if you could put your translation back up again.
Okay, let me do it.
Thanks.
Okay, here. Is that right? Okay, yeah.
Okay. I think mine has some extra lines near the beginning, because mine says the high is lowered and the low is raised. If the string is too long, it is shortened. If there is not enough, it is made longer. But if that's not there in the original, then never mind.
Oh, hold
So
on,
you're-
hold on. I may have a mistake. Let me look at again. Yeah, I think I missed one line. So, okay, sorry, that's my fault. So I need to fix it. So,
Okay, well, my question really was about that. And since you can read the Chinese, you could answer it.
okay.
I was
yeah.
just wondering about the meaning of the physical meaning. I mean, I liked it that Aman pointed out the physicality of a bow, because for many of us, it's, yeah, you know, you tried some archery when you were a little kid at summer camp or school or something, but then that's sort of it. So the string is too long, it is shortened. If there is not enough, it is made longer. In a funny sense, when you're drawing a bow, you're shortening the string in a way by taking up any slack that there is, by increasing the tension. And at the same time, you're also making it longer. So I didn't know if this part was, those lines were referring to that, or if they were referring just to someone who was sort of tuning up their bow before using it.
Okay, so there's no single word refer to the string in Chinese. So that's just the interpreter's own idea. So basics, the line I'm missing is talking about, I think among your, well, you probably edit, I cut and paste and I miss it. So basics.
I missed it in the rereading too, so I share the blame
Okay,
here.
that's the reason. Okay, so I fix it. I remember I translated, but it's not here. So probably I cut and paste. I forget. Thank you for reminding. But to back to Madeline's question, actually nothing with string. Okay, so the line I'm missing is talking about the basic is talking about increase the feel the deficiency, and then increase the deficiency. Okay, so feel the deficiency and feel the deficiency and decrease the excess. So basically the same line as this line. Okay, same line as just repeat. Okay, basically just repeat. Basically talk about decrease the excess, okay, excess, and feel the deficiency. There's nothing about string. Okay, that's the only thing they talk about. So string is a mistranslation, put this way. Thank you.
Yeah, for what it's worth, in all the translations that I have seen, string had not been used in any of them. So, and that was, you know, that's not an exhaustive search, but it's seven different translations I did look at. So, yeah, I think the Jia Fufang she may have taken liberties with that, as do a lot of these translators. Next up, we have Brian. Your comment has to be as good as last time, or Penny. Okay.
This is Penny, so it's not going to be as good, but
No, it'd be better.
no. But I mean, a lot of people have kind of made this comment, but or talked about it, even Brian. I mean, the idea that when you were like a hunter-gatherer society, there was no way that the people thought that they were producing everything that they needed to live on. They depended on nature. They were part of nature. Right. You know, if times were good, they all had a lot. If times were bad, they all suffered. But they did not see themselves as separate. Whereas when they started, of course, farming and being able to put things away for the rainy day, number one, they felt it was their own labor. So they felt that, you know, they did it, not that it was just there from nature and it was taken. And since there were good years and bad years, then if they could put more away, then some other people might suffer, but they wouldn't suffer. So I think that people began to be more individualistic about it and not thinking that, well, as a whole, I mean, it's a bad year, we're all going to suffer. They're like, well, you know, I've got more in my store, so I don't have to suffer. Somebody else might have to. And
I mean, I think society, basically, it's that's the viewpoint we have today, very individualistic, I did it, it's mine, I can use it, it's only for me, and I don't care about other people. And just in passing, Brian, we were watching two commentators talking about Russia and the impact of the sanctions in Russia yesterday. And one of them said, well, it could be good for Russia because if they go through this period of difficulty, maybe they will create a stronger society and it will, be more equal. And I just thought, I thought, what planet is that man living on? I can, if anything, it's going to be the opposite. That,
Yeah.
the people at the top are going to still keep more, and the people at the bottom are going to have less. I just didn't see it. And then this is basically the same idea,
From
those who don't have and give to those who already have more.
It is interesting that the minute you become the beneficiary of your labor, that you start to see it as yours and the immediate beneficiary, and don't necessarily discount you start to discount others in that process. And that gets us further away from following the way, which actually gets us further away from nature itself. So I think that that's an excellent example how it's an excessive form of individualism that actually starts to, and that is more related to the way we behave as human beings, not as how we behave closer to nature itself. So, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that this is something that still applies today. This rugged individualism, where people feel like that everything they've earned is on their own and in their own little world. Therefore, that it's not necessarily no one else is entitled to their help, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't want to say their help. Maybe that's not a nice way of saying it, but I think the point is being made. So thank you. Great points, Penny. I really appreciate it. Madeline, or hang on, let me double check, Madeline, before I call on you. Not yes, Madeline, you're next.
Okay. Something Penny said, it's about when our perceived separation from nature began.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the cave paintings, in Europe, they are mostly game animals, basically all game animals. But in the rest of the world, they include other animals as well as plants. And sometimes I think, maybe they were painting them because, magic or something. The gods, maybe they were painting them because they loved them. And maybe they were doing the cave paintings because they already felt separate. In other words, it could have gone back that far, and that it was a way of trying to retrieve some sense of being back in touch with things. Oh, good, Aman.
Well, since Aman was called
I
on,
was going to patiently wait my turn.
I was about to say, Evanique did type exclamation point first, but since I don't know, do you want to go?
No, please, by all means. I want chivalry to have its resurrection.
I was about to tell you to take the shot, Aman. Just put the final nail in the coffin. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Evanique.
Thank you too, Aman, for letting me go. Something that Penny was talking about and Madeline was just talking about, and I was thinking, I don't know. I grew up in lower income neighborhood, and one of the things is that if we had, if we didn't have something, we could go to the neighbors and borrow it, right? And my mom said the same thing. Like when she lived, where she lived in Virginia was very agricultural, but it was also very much farmland. And so if you needed like food or chicken, you can go get them. You needed eggs, you could go get them. You know, back in her day, there was cornfields, and she used to say, you know, they would leave enough for people to come get. So if they wanted corn, they could just take a pillowcase and a knife and go cut it down off of someone else's land. And I was like, so we did, even in America, even in rugged individualism, we had that. Like people looked out for each other. People, you know, like even like her mother lived through the Depression, and she said they never starved. Now, part of that was because they knew how to make a meal out of, you know, scraps, but part of it was because if you were missing something and you needed it for like a recipe or something, you could go to your neighbor or send your children to your neighbor and say, hey, go get me a cup of sugar from Miss so-and-so's house. So I was wondering, when did that start to go away? And I was thinking, probably when we started bringing more and more technology in, which make people more individualistic, like, you know, television. Think about it like that. Like people had television. Now it's like Shrikant described it as it's just one way, right? You know, technology when it first came out, like video games, you're just interacting with a screen. You're not really interacting with people. So I was thinking I think in some ways, when we progress, we kind of, it seems like we regress a little bit in human interaction and looking out for each other each time. And it starts small, you don't think about it, you know, but it does. And then the next thing you know, we have societies where we're very much individualistic. And so I think, I don't know how to solve for it. And I think it goes to your question, Joe, like, how does this apply to today? Like, how can we apply this today? I think we start to see it now, ironically, with the pandemic, when people had to start using Zoom, technology connected people around the world. Just this is meetup, right? But I think we just have to be careful when we progress that we're not progressing so much that we just lose that human element of needing each other. And I think that's the key, is that we have to realize that we need each other in order to make it through this world. So that was my point. Thank you, Aman. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you mentioned a number of interesting points there. You know, what really does result in us sharing, and that we do share a little bit less than we once did. But I'm going to let Aman speak as my phone keeps ringing here. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate getting credit for just simple manners. I don't know if anyone has heard of this place. And I believe, if I can butcher my Turkish, it's pronounced Göbekli Tepe. It is an abandoned temple in the Turkish hinterlands, dates from right after the Younger Dryad period, so about 9500-ish BC. We're asking, the reason I bring it up is the question about when did we abandon this sort of egalitarian hunter-gatherer society and become these possessor-owner societies, which I think is a more appropriate sort of counterposing than individualism versus collectivism, because it doesn't really seem to matter whether you look at a collectivist ideology or an individualistic one. Societies that move into ownership societies, because Asia is traditionally very collectivistic, but they still had this notion of mine and yours, of in-group and out-group. And so that sort of possessiveness seems to have stemmed from right around the Younger Dryad. And I've seen at least one theory that says it happened out of necessity. People didn't decide they wanted to farm because agriculture gave them greater yields or more bounty. It was, we had a mini ice age, and the game went away, and the normal bounty that was there to be found went away. And so whether people started, you know, digging trenches in the river to get them over to that, you know, olive tree to get it to just bloom one more time, nobody knows exactly where the agriculture began. This temple is interesting because it's built at that time, and it appears to be first built to, some people thought it was a storehouse for those excesses. Then there are others who say, no, this was a place to make sacrifices for when that abundance actually yielded enough abundance to then be revered to the gods. But the interesting thing about it is there's no housing. There's no indication that anyone ever lived there. And when it was abandoned, it wasn't merely walked away from, it was torn down and buried, as if someone said, we made a huge mistake. These were the first agriculturalists in the, you know, Asia Minor European continent. And apparently they didn't approve of their own discovery, but it was almost as if they had hopped onto the escalator already and it was too late, because once you get that ball rolling, the promise of more yields becomes so alluring that it's very difficult to say, well, I could go out and hunt, you know, another day, or I could go gather, you know, a little further from here. But if I just put in just a little more effort, and then just a little more effort, and then, you know, we get to an 8-hour work day, 7 days a week, whereas the average hunter-gatherer puts in an average of maybe 12 to 18 hours of labor in tasks a week. That's kind of the average quota of work I've seen in those societies, or I've seen reported in most of those societies. So this is kind of the touch-off point. Why did we go off of the natural way? Because we had to, probably, if starvation was our only alternative. But once we got onto that sort of cycle, it's an almost impossible addiction to break, to think, well, if I just do a little more, I know there will be food here. And if I can convince my neighbor to do a little bit more, we can get a little bit even more food here until we've got so much food, it's bountiful again. But look at how hard we work to make it happen. Somebody's got to organize all this. These are just sort of thoughts on the question of how did this all go off the rails? And I'm not advocating for a return to primitive life. I don't think anyone could with a straight face say that that is the solution now. But I do think that there is a strong vein of that in the Dao De Jing, because it was less far away then for them in memory and still observable more readily around them.
Excellent comments as always. Thank you, Aman. Next up, we have Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I remember last week, I guess, I'm on mentioning about cognitive dissonance. I would say we need cognitive revolution. You think about it, it's for even our modern days, contemporary days, we so individual focused, we achieved, we cannot live own life without anybody. We don't need people help. We got enough food. It's especially give kind of illusion. We don't need, actually we need it. When kids play video game, they play with others the virtual way. We still use tools, food from other folks' work and effort. Either you see, we gonna, oh, that's myself. However, anything else, you still connected with world, with the surround. So, by the way, I want to thing we got a dichotomy thinking, yes or no, good or bad, right or wrong. That's going to delusion for example, I don't want to this, European what's happened. We're going to completely cut voice from Rasa. We're going back to 50 years ago, 70 years ago. There's two world, communist or capitalism. We complete, that's a different human experience. So if it's a big topic, I don't want to mention that. One example, for example, in China, it's happened. Okay, we cannot use collective effort for one whole village. We call it 大锅饭, big pot food, whole village share with. It's so poor, if poor, everybody poor. So some countries they called open policy that time about in 1978. Most of the countries opened. Economy, split the wealthy, give one cow or couple family, one family share land and anything to do that. The one from my province, one village is poor. They lack land, but however, they use collective effort. What's happening now? Now they got own couple of factory. They are wealthy than surrounding. So here's really like a Dao of yin and yang. We need both sides, individual, not like yes or no. We need both collective and individual. Human experience is valid. We all need what's happening. You can, if I'm talking too much, from Confucius also, 3 people walk, one of the are teachers. We can select the good thing, take it. If we think it's a bad thing, we look at it, we correct it, apply to ourselves. Why we cut their people voice? Cancel culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have Jason.
Yeah, thank you for mention about the how do you call it, Kopeta tipi, okay, and then yeah, that's very important, and that remind me to understand this chapter, because this chapter talking about the Tao of heaven and then talk about the Tao of the people. Okay, that's remind me. I think it's very possible the situation, because that's assume this Dao De Jing is from the southern culture, southern Chinese culture, which is less developed than the northern part. So it probably still, if I compare this one with Confucius' teaching, Confucius keep it talking about the previous civilized society, and then Dao De Jing here is talking about previous uncivilized hunter and the gathering society. So they talk about the way of heaven as egalitarian, okay, society, which is just like a hunter and the gathering society. And then talk about the way of the people, the Tao of people is the contemporary civilized society, agricultural society. So look like it's talking about the change, right? The way of the Tao of heaven and the Tao of people. And that the among talk about the how to pronounce it, Tepi. Okay, that one represent the transition from the hunter and the gatherer to the agricultural society. So it just perfect match to this text is talking about the Tao of heaven and the Tao of people, and that's this chapter is talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Next up, we have Brian.
I like very much what Kevin has been saying, and I think, yes, it is, and also Evanique, is sharing is important in all the different institutional contexts, because there are risks in life, and sharing to cover everyone's needs is just it's a necessity that always exists. The poor will always be with us. And that was one of the teachings of Jesus in this Hellenistic society. And, you know, it's coming out here too in this different society. The Joe said, well, you know, when you think you're the beneficiary of your own labor, then you think you own it. It even goes beyond that. If you're the beneficiary of other people's labor, you think you own it. And that arises out of this property, these property systems or property contexts, these institutions that arose. And that goes back so far. I don't think people have really sorted it out, but certainly the temple economies back in Sumeria raised issues about, you know, who owns. If you're a farmer and you create something, you know, your family or small group create something and deliver it to the temple, then yeah, you get this little warehouse receipt, but who owns it? Who gets to use it? Who benefits from it? A lot of that went into to feed the workers in the city who were basically working for the temple, making all kinds of, you know, processed goods, textiles, and the rest in the city, building the walls, building the temples, etc. You know, going back, the key thing is just the sharing is necessarily an important part of life, whatever the institutional contexts are. And there are, often it's just, as illustrated by this text, in institutional or civilized, cultured, we don't share enough people, we don't take care of everyone's needs. And that's, you know, that's a shame. And but I think it arises through this property systems. Like, I'll just, you know, examples. I see so much, because I work in corporations, I see so much that people think I did this. The people at the top of the corporations, they necessarily, you know, because they get to define the strategy, they think that they earned all this money, and that's not true. A lot of people were involved. Or even you go back to, you know, who built King Solomon's temples? People say, well, maybe it wasn't King Solomon, maybe it was King Herod or whoever. It was another much more nasty king back then that might well have built those temples. Neither of those is true. It's the people who built those temples. It's always, you know, that I did this, and that if you're the top of the organization, it just simply is not true. You maybe arranged it, or you inspired it, or organized it, but you did not do it. And so that, you know, that just re-emphasizes, I think, the importance of sharing in these very complex institutional arrangements, because who owns, you know, the fruits of the labor is sometimes very centralized, and people buy into this very centralized idea. That did I say Ken Skilling, who was the head of Enron, he said, you know, the person who comes up with the idea should get all the benefit. And he's the one who came up with the idea of this, because he helped take over this pipeline company. He came up with the idea of setting up a market, which is much more of an asset light business. That was partly his idea. So he thinks all of the benefit of that should come to him. And, you know, that was reflected, I think, partly in his behaviors. As regards Göbekli Tepe, I'm very interested in that place. I just listened to a YouTube presentation on it, maybe last night, certainly this week, by the Histocrat, if people who are interested. I think it's called The Birth of Civilization. And Göbekli Tepe is not entirely settled. What Aman said, I think, one thing Aman said is really important, in that there are no large villages around it. It's not settled that it was that this was a monumental structure at the center of an agricultural society. You know, that's a possibility, but I think people see it more as a monumental structure that arose out of a hunter-gatherer society because of the iconography on it. There's no agricultural iconography, no domesticated animals. It's all wild animals carved into the iconography there. And the some people think, in addition to what Aman and Jason have said, that it's actually could have been used for ceremonial burials and that bodies were exposed to the elements there and eaten by the vultures and crows and the rest. So it's up in the air as to what that was. But most of the societies around there are agricultural societies before that, the Natufian societies, in kind of in that area, but in the Levant have they been discovered around the Sea of Galilee. More closely to the time of Göbekli Tepe was Çatalhöyük, which is west of Göbekli Tepe. That is a very large agglomeration. People don't yet call it a city because it doesn't have the monumental structures or the specialization and label. It just looks like a lot of people living together and probably sharing and helping each other out, sharing the risks of living, but not in a very centralized way. And that went on a long time after Göbekli Tepe. People think again that the agriculture really took off in the organized agriculture with property and all of that took off when, just as Aman said, after the what do they call it, the Younger Dryas, the things got a lot drier, so people were driven out of these what used to be the lush hills in the Anatolian plain, in the Anatolian steppe and the southern Anatolia, and had to move down into living on the riverbanks of the Tigris and Euphrates. And from that, they figured out how to do irrigation. And when they started figuring irrigation, then they had to work together, to build out the cropland. It wasn't just on the edge of the banks of the river anymore. And in that way, agricultural and civilization kind of with the irrigation and all that took off together. And that sounds very similar to what based on my very limited understanding, what kind of went on in China around the Yellow and Yangtze rivers.
Wonderful comments. If it were more, I almost want to question this idea of that institutions themselves being able to follow the way or not, whether they're able to follow the way. I mean, because a lot of people have brought up the idea of institutions, not being able to service people properly. But I think that's a little bit off topic, but it's an interesting thought. I have Ebony next.
Okay, well, actually, I'm kind of going to bring you back there because I had a thought when Brian was talking about Enron, and I was thinking of this thing called the Great Resignation, right? People are, in a sense, tired of a corporation saying, if I came up with the idea, I get all the benefits. I think what this chapter 77 is referring to is that there are a lot of people that contribute to society or contribute to the earth. And when they do that, not to say that they deserve credit, because the end actually talks about that. So I'm just gonna, read that really quick. It says, therefore the sage works anonymously. She achieves great things, but does not wait for praise. She does not want her talents to attract attention to her. And I think that last part goes to what we've been talking about during this discussion. It's not about getting praise for your actions. It's about, knowing that what you do is going to contribute to society. There's a lot of people that contribute to society whose names we will never know, and nor do they care that we know their names. I think that's what makes a society function. That's what I think. If you're going to have an institution, that has to be the focus of it. It can't be about one person. It can't be about, oh, this person achieved this and you only achieved this. That just creates animosity. But if you look at it as, I'm doing my part, I'm making my contribution, I think that's where we go the way of the Tao, is if we go that way and we don't worry about the attention that we're going to get, as long, you know, and if everybody's really thinking like that, then we all just put in the effort, because we all know at the end of the day, we're going to eat, we're going to be okay, because it's a group effort, not showcasing one person. And I think Aman talked about this too, when he was talking about the hunters that, you know, kind of took down the young man, saying, you brought me out for the skinny, this skinny piece of animal, is to make sure that his head doesn't get too big and that he doesn't think too highly of himself.
Yeah, there's one last comment I'll make regarding this verse. Oh, go ahead, Penny. I just saw that you put your explanation point in the chat. Go right ahead.
I just had a thought about, you know, when we were talking about at what point did humans start to develop, you know, go from hunter-gatherers to agriculture and develop that possessive collectionist philosophy and individualistic. And one thing that I was thinking of is, like, even today though, like if there's something like a natural disaster, so like, you know, a tornado goes through a town, then it's kind of like the culture has broken down, the society has broken down, kind of the rules no longer apply, and people immediately start helping each other, acting as a team, going out and seeing what they can do, you know, which is kind of would be the Tao of heaven approach.
Right. Yeah.
So when it looks kind of like all at once the rules and the way things are going no longer apply, then people go back to that Tao of heaven approach, where they say, oh, well, we're in this together. What can I do to help?
Can I add one thing?
Please do.
A lot of these institutions have to do with efficient production, not efficient distribution.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. And so the distribution is what we're talking about to some extent here. I think that, first of all, I want to thank, I think Kevin said a lot that goes directly to this, and also Madeline, by highlighting the spiritual and cultural elements of this. And that's reflected in this, you know, this mindset that you own what, you know, that things that are made by, that you produce, you own what you produce, or what other people produce for you. And that's kind of the yang, and the yin would be, yeah, well, that's half of it. Production's half of it, but distribution is the other half. And you need to share to satisfy everybody else's needs. And that's kind of the male feminine, or the female masculine again. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of just a metaphor, but that you need distribution to complement and complete the production. Yes. Otherwise, you don't really have a complete system. Plus, charity seems to be, you know, it's just a necessary and irreplaceable virtue, because none of these systems is perfect.
That's right. I agree wholeheartedly. You know, basically, one of the lines that I'd taken notes on is this, and it was talking about essentially charity, not only charity, but this idea of that you're not only charitable, but you're not also seeking praise in that process. And that's what the sage actually seeks to do. So that, yes, the sage doesn't participate in the process of taking from those who do not have. So that it's, yeah, there's charity and kind of implied in that, but there's also the reason you're doing it. You're not doing it to be praised. You're doing it because you're following the way. So, so next up we have Margarita, followed by, I believe, Kevin. Great comments this evening, everyone.
Hi. So I don't know much about anthropology, but I know that there is this ethnic group in Indonesia they called as Badui people. They're agricultural community that live among only with their ethnic group. They refuse to be intervene with modern society, and they're very much egalitarian. Agriculture, but egalitarian. They don't believe in possession, like you be like the richest person. I think they simply live their life according to their needs. So if they need some more money, they will get more money selling more stuff, but only according to their needs. And with regard to collecting goods, earning your effort, I think it's comparable in other kingdom of animal. We know that animal also store their food. But I think the difference between human and animals that they store food only to their needs, not like human. I think we start to say that as one of the cardinal sin, greed. That's probably what's differentiate us a little bit, not all, not a little bit. I remember there's this funny videos. There's a pile of bananas and there's so many monkeys down there. I thought, oh, this monkey probably gonna take like a bunch for them. No, actually one monkey only collect one or two and leave the rest for other monkey. So perhaps it's not just about transition, but also our innate as human, innate determinant as human, perhaps that we need to be aware of, just like JP said, we need to put this bowl in balance, because we do have that tendency as well, regardless the external factor, the environment factor happenings around us. Yeah, thank you.
Very, very interesting point. I'm actually even, I've been thinking about doing a meetup on the whole idea of growth. Whether this is actually something that is a worthwhile goal. Is growth really the goal, or is it to, or does it lead to excess? And if you're talking about meeting needs, that's something that maybe you want to reassess what your actual goals and values are. So that's, I mean, it's an interesting, it's been talked about quite a bit, but this is definitely something that I've been eager to lead a meetup on. I have a lot of sources on it, but it gets to what you were saying, essentially, is that when you're going beyond need, what's beyond what's actually needed in general. So next up, let's see. We have, I think Aman, Kevin was first. Aman, did you want to comment?
Go ahead, Aman. After you.
No, Kevin, go first.
You go ahead.
This is going to turn into one of those polite things. I'll be as brief as I can.
Well, you saved chivalry earlier, so I think that you deserve to go first.
One, I've caught on to the strategy, and thank you, Ebony, for confirming that we are going to drag each chapter for the last 4 out for as long as possible, so we do not end this group. And I'm fine with that strategy.
Me too.
Which almost made me. I wanted to be uncharacteristically optimistic, and you can call it optimism or just contrarian for a moment, but I do think there was something to what Kevin said before about needing both, and about this idea of one not better than the other, and how I think, Ebony, you touched on this too, how technology is actually able to be a facilitator for some of this, as opposed to the great destroyer of humanity. Groups like this ability to reach out is something that could not exist prior to, that sort of catastrophe that Penny was talking about in the form of COVID. We wouldn't have been able to do these sort of long form convention meetups and discuss something from all corners of the world. No convention was going to run a year long and gather people from every corner of the planet to be able to talk about one thing in a long form like this. That is new, and that is facilitated by technology. And it allows the building of community in a place and in a way that it could not have happened before. The other thing I wanted to mention was about sort of this avarice and caprice of, corporate entities like Enron desiring to just collect more and gather more. When you look at sort of the horizontal business structures that are peer-to-peer facilitated, that are now almost mainstream, Uber putting the taxi companies out of business, Airbnb displacing the modern hotel. There's a whole bunch of these sort of entities that are incentivizing people to be better versions of themselves with other people. If you had told someone 10 years ago, yeah, I want to start a service where you get into a stranger's car and let them drive you from point A to point B, we'd have looked at you like you had grown a nipple out of your forehead. But it has become so commonplace to us because those incentives are there to be the best version, and there is some peer reinforcement to that. I do think that those sort of structures have the potential of creating a nice synthesis that will not be a return to primitive egalitarian societies, but may undermine and do away with sort of this avarice, mine is mine and only mine possessive societies. I think we are becoming a bit more sharing than we once were. And I think technology can actually help facilitate that. So being Pollyanna is not my strong suit. Let me know how I did.
I think you did excellent, actually. I mean, I agree with you that technology does have a way of facilitating less waste, put it that way, in a way of getting people what they need at a minimal level, especially when you're talking about even things like microfinance, which is I have some experience with, which is actually quite interesting when you could do peer-to-peer types of lending. That actually is a very efficient, well, can be efficient. It's also unstable way of actually making transactions. But technology can be a facilitator of ensuring people have enough, as opposed to, as we had used some examples where it could lead to certain types of hoarding. So next up we have Evanique, I believe. Oh, wait a minute.
No,
It's
I already went.
Kevin. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, no, it's Kevin.
It's okay.
Yeah, it was you.
Yeah, I already
I
went,
try to
Kevin.
follow, I agree everyone you think, and I'm going to follow the Brian mentioned on efficiency and distribution. I would question more, by the way, I'm going to agree with you guys, we're going to chapter by chapter, maybe more need that. Then also bring the questions for why I like, because you see, look at the amount of picture. It's upside down. That's what our thinking is, like Dao is you talk about it under detail. It's different, the practice we like, even in this chapter 77. Most people not like basically you last the poor people service for richer people. However, in the nature world, it should be the wealthy one try help the poor, because it's not like water flow. You got to one side the water is high, another side the water is low. From high to low, that's by nature. Anyway, so I would question about the distribution. Who own the earth? Who own that mountain? Why you build boundary? This is so costly. Look at your current happen in the war, right? In the European. And that do deduction and divide and also do the minus. We're not a building thing. And if furthermore, if it's off the topic here is look at the water. We sort of water and sand. Now we build like we keep build city things. Now we destroy city build again. Look like the build economy. However, how about the nature resource? We may think about agriculture kind of outdated because we have food. This year, look at the gas, food, and everything else. And another side of upshare is we lack a truck driver. Anyway, and one word very interesting, we got a meta, right? Meta is in the Greek is next, again, or after. However, you translate to in Chinese called yue, origin. Basically, you track back also makes sense too, meta. And who is Margarita mentioned that awareness is very important. Very awareness about the nature, how they bring it to us, and about how important the mother love the children. That's any like how mother they need to pay the mother. How will they pay for the motherhood? To work at home and bring the kids. Our society not value the mother side, but we value the production side. Okay, I work for a production line, $100 per hour maybe in the inflation in the future, and also love. So if you can love yourself, your close one, why cannot you love the others, the stranger? They allow your point about the joy, bring the girl is the goal. What's the purpose? Well, maybe happiness is the goal. If you look at happiness, look at the country called Nepal. They are a perfect country. Look at the happiness. I'm sorry to say, I watch lots of YouTube video. People are poor, but they're happy. Look at the laughing. Look at the rich people. Look at their face. They think about the money. Next, maybe tomorrow, how the stock don't drop. I'm going to build wealthy. However, what come, what go. Where you come from the earth, you go back to the earth. So yeah, hopefully, one day I'm going to explain your picture of human being upside down. Our cognitive thinking need, rethink thing. Individually make yourself, if live with that. If I'm indigenous people, can I live a indigenous life? Indigenous life. Based modern value, we don't. We got a single value, build wealthy. It's for zero for you. So how about a life without electricity? Try one day. How about a life without internet? No electronic device. At least give it a try. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciated your supply side economics critique, and as well as your idea that that happiness as a measure is also pretty interesting as well. It's actually a tool that is being used in some countries called GNP, or GNHP, I think, gross national happiness products, like something along those lines. But yes, using other measures, but it is difficult. But it does include having your basic needs met. So it's interesting. I'm making this a little too economic, but so why don't we go to our next is we have, I believe, Brian, followed by Madeline.
So a lot of people have said a lot of great things. It's really fascinating. I'll just share one thing, or share one thing and then a couple of comments. Following up on Aman's peer-to-peer, and also the idea of sharing. And I think there's the sharing and the charity is necessary in all these many different, sometimes complex contexts. I had a minister friend once who, when he wasn't in the pulpit, would like to give interpretations of New Testament stories that weren't so miraculous. And the the sermon on the feeding the 5,000 with the 7 fish and the 7 loaves of bread, he posited that, well, there are 5,000 people there. Some of them didn't have enough food, but some had too much. And so he started passing around the baskets, and people started sharing what they had. And in the end, it turned out there was enough from all this sharing, there was enough to feed everybody together with food left, lots of food left over. So it was, he thought that might just have been an example of, accessing the excess and getting it shared kind of in a peer-to-peer arrangement. If you did the growth thing, that's a huge topic. I taught sustainability for a while in the business schools, and I'm not big on the statistics and all that. You might have statistics, but that would be of interest to me. Also, I want to flag that Evanique and I are Evanique's leading, I think. Nod, yes, Evanique. Evanique's leading, and on the divine feminine, and so the kind of the history of the goddess. And I can tell you that this, the divine feminine, the history of the goddess, touches on all these topics we touched on today, and this history that we touched on with Göbekli Tepe and the Natufians. And so the goddess is just, it's the idea of the god and goddess complement each other. It's the yin and yang. And you can't have a whole personality, or a whole and healthy personality, or a whole and healthy society without both. Without these distribution and production. There are just so many different ways. And this, the feminine, divine feminine kind of emphasizes that. And if, I don't know quite how we're going to do it, but if we trace it through historically, you'll see how that plays out. By looking at the history of the goddess over millennia, how the importance of having a whole society which operationally expresses itself through people complementing each other as needed. So anyway, there's a plug for that one. We're going to have at least one meeting on that.
Well, we're
Thanks
looking
for the
forward
plug.
to that. Yeah, and we're looking forward to that. And there's a yin yang balance there. So I like that. I'm already looking forward to it, and I'm going to take advantage of you on that growth meetup. Next up we have Madeline.
Yes. Okay, so as I understand how these meetings are going to be structured, so last week we did 2 chapters. This week we did 1. Next week we'll do the first half of 78. The week after that we'll do the next quarter of 78. And eventually we'll get down to the individual strokes of the last character in 78.
Well, you know what? I'm going to work. Oh, go ahead. Come on.
So we're going to have Zeno's paradox played out in real time is what you're planning.
Yes.
All of a sudden I'm going to be becoming very, very strict on what types of your translation, what words you're using. I'm going to get the thesaurus out and say, why didn't you use this word? Why didn't you use this word? So as a way of delaying it, just to give some background, Shrikant, we were kind of lamenting the fact that we're nearing the close. And many of us, myself included, who does not necessarily handle goodbyes, especially of good groups, too well. That in good series, yeah, it was a bit of a bittersweet, but it's true. We have discovered ways to make to prolong the pain. So anyway, if anybody else doesn't have any comments, I really liked Madeline's closing comments. And I thank everybody for their comments this evening. It was really wonderful. And thank you, Aman and Jason, for your time as always. But I know Shrikant has some really interesting meetups coming up that he's going to be announcing.
Yes, so I don't like goodbyes, you know. The thing is, what I want to do is I want to kind of brainstorm with people about various things that they're interested in doing. Like Evanique and Brian are doing the divine feminine. What are the topics would you like to discuss? Because what I want to do is that I want to do like a day where people can bring in a variety of topics. I already have one, Anton, who's going to be talking about Epicureanism and Stoicism. So he's going to get a couple of Epicureans in addition to himself to talk about that. And then I'll have Joe and other people on Stoicism talk about that and put all kinds of, kind of thoughts on the table and have a discussion. The way I'm thinking about it is that I think the newest series that we have launched on Mondays with Maritza on poems is going so incredibly well. People are coming there who can write poetry. And then there is this collaboration. We do collaborative poetry and it's just incredible. So you can look up, Joe, if you could put the link to the Scribal Hyperbook where
Sure.
people can read all the collaborative poetry that, these two groups produced. One on, the last time it was on redemption. The one before that was on courage. There's also a list of all the poems that were read out. Many of them famous poems, many of them poems that people had written themselves. So I'm looking forward to topics. So the general question I have for people is what topics are you interested in discussing? So we can take, parts of the Tao, we can take parts of anything, any kind of topics that you guys are interested in discussing. So go ahead and type ! If you would like to talk about some topics that really catch your attention. And we'll figure out a way of incorporating that into schedules. I think, for example, the divine feminine is going to be fantastic. We have got, it's going to be really good. The first meetup itself was incredible. Not only we talked about Mary Magdalene, but we ended up actually discussing the general concept of divine feminine. But I'm looking for more and more themes like that. So go ahead and type ! If you would like to share what topics you would like to see discussed, you would like to discuss. Amon, go ahead.
I don't have one to share, but I did have a question. Did the Harry Potter group ever actually get off the ground?
We did one session, and there was this battle between houses. Evanique took 2 houses, and Christiane took 2 houses, and they battled it out. And I don't know what happened to that. Evanique, you want to address that?
I thought it was only supposed to be one meetup, but I would be more than happy to do a series.
Okay.
On Harry Potter and collaborate with people.
Right. Harry Potter. And there are some very deep ideas there. We can take the idea of the Dementors and how do you face Dementors? There is one Harry Potter fan fiction that I really like, which has got a very amazing take on Dementors, very fundamental take on Dementors. And we can go, so yes, Harry Potter, I think, is great. It's very rich in terms of concepts we can pick up. All right, so that's one. Divine feminine is another one. What else? Folks, go ahead and talk about what you would like to talk about. This is your chance to shape what we do. You can put it in the chat if you're shy, but there's no reason to be shy. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'm just worried about time-wise if I have it, but a series on Nassim Taleb's books.
Taleb, yeah, Taleb is definitely
Yeah, he would be.
yeah.
Yeah, I think Taleb or Ray Dalio, one of the two
Mhm.
would, and I
Sure.
think that would both fill a need for kind of more of a current events economic feel for what we were doing, and it still remains philosophical because they take very philosophical approaches to their works. So yeah, I think that would be actually a really you would have to go back, and I would probably recommend maybe starting with his first book. And kind of going through the series, but that could be
Sure. I
something.
mean,
that's worth
let's start with just one. If I had to pick one, which one would you pick of Nassim Taleb? Which is your favorite?
Well, I still have to read Anti-Fragile.
That's the
So
best one, by the way.
is it really?
Yeah, it's incredible.
I heard it's hard to start with if you were to
Really?
start
Okay.
with that.
No,
Yeah.
it's great. We did a series on that in the New York in-person meetup. Ray Dalio, actually, we covered very thoroughly. And I have a OneNote, a Microsoft OneNote, where like 50 of us were writing notes chapter by chapter and talking to each other while we were reading.
Oh, wow.
And we were doing meetups on weekends, on Saturday on that. So that's the Principles is a very powerful book. Okay, let's see. Go ahead.
I'll have to let you know because I'm leaning towards Black Swan, but
Sure. So Nassim Taleb is one. All right. Who else wants to put something on the table? Marco, let me see. Mental model and decision making. Okay. Wonderful. Mental models. All right. Anybody else? Folks, go ahead and put Evanik, what would you like to discuss?
Oh, I'm already discussing it, the divine feminine,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I'm open to Harry Potter, whoever wants to collaborate on that.
Very good. Let's see. What about Madeline? Madeline, what about you? What would you like to discuss?
I would be up for a series on Chuang Tzu. He was a later Taoist, and it would be fun to just sort of go through his stories and discuss them.
Okay, very good. I seriously considered that. Absolutely. That's excellent. Margarita, what about you?
Yeah, actually, following this Dao, I think it will be great if we can work on some neo-Taoism,
okay,
perhaps to see the trend. Yeah, thank you.
Neo-Taoism.
I would recommend.
Go ahead.
I'd recommend Ge Hong for neo-Taoism.
Okay.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Okay, very good. Let's see, Mike 3.
Yeah, I didn't recognize them either.
I don't know where that came from, actually. I wouldn't mind revisiting improv one night, not necessarily comedic improv, but all types of improvisation.
Sure.
That the group could some
Wonderful.
exercises.
You know what? I really like that, because what it does is that it kind of mixes things up. Just like the poetry thing puts a completely different, it's a different vibe. So I definitely would love that. All right, let's see. Okay, so Madeline and Joe are going to have a private meetup on War and Peace.
Yes.
375 meetups in a row until both fall asleep. All right, let's see.
I guess you're going to gloss over the threat, huh, Shrikant?
What's that?
You're going to gloss over the threat?
Yeah. It's easy. It's just, it's a very easy threat to handle, because you just make it happen. Just let them start, and then let's see what happens. It's automatic way of handling with the threat. Let's see. What about Dave from Tacoma? Dave from Tacoma, what would you like to see us do?
My friend Shrikant, I started this book on the Gita, and it mentions there's another famous book of Indian literature, the Ramayana.
Yes.
I know you were talking about there was a separate text. I'm just thinking maybe to follow on because I'm really intrigued by all this Eastern study we've been doing.
Sure. No, I think the Gita meetups are just incredible. I'm trying to come today. I was trying to write. Thanks to Joe, I get this evening off to do something, and I was trying to write. Inspired by yesterday's poetry meetups, I was writing a poem on Om. What is the meaning of Om? So I don't know. But Ramayana is a very good candidate. The other candidate I'm looking for, firstly, Gita meetups. We've got a gentleman called Yogeshwar who reads Sanskrit and who has read all the major Sanskrit commentaries on Gita, like Shankara and everybody. So he's, he is doing a fantastic job of taking us through Gita. The thing I want to go to next on the Indian context is to go in the consciousness side. And that is going to be Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, which is like the foundation of yoga and foundation of meditation, which is a very deep work, which also he has studied in depth. I have also read it, many times. So we've got a very good foundation. And I think Gita prepares the ground for it. So on Indian thing, I want to just go for the moon, because those would be, Ramayana would be good kind of, I recommend it very highly as a good backgrounder of a story. That's Ramayana and Mahabharata are two of the main epics. But thank you. Next up is Brian. Brian, what would you like to see? It would help if you can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
So like Dave from Tacoma, Penny and I both really like the Gita, and we're spending time reading it during the week. The Upanishads, I know I've read some of them, and some of them are really short, so it just might be a nice format, but I'm deferring to you. I'll just put that out there.
Right. Well, what I'm trying to do is that thankfully, with combination of Yogeshwar, me, and all the resources I have, on India, I am able to kind of map out kind of Indian thought and pick like the core. Like Gita is the great place to start. It is really a foundation. And then I will take, steps from there. Upanishads is a little too large, I think, and we'll have to figure out which to include and which not to include and stuff like that. So, but I'm definitely going to continue on the Indian, thought. And the next best candidate I can think of is Patanjali. It's going to take us a long time to go through Gita, just like, and I think people have gotten this idea here in the Tao of applying the Zeno paradox. And I think that will happen to Gita also. And I hope that people don't figure out that things can move in the opposite direction as well. So we'll go like 8180 backwards or something like that. So I think that might happen to Gita also. In Gita, we have to kind of, Yogeshwar came in kind of in the middle. So I will also do the initial chapters with Yogeshwar before going on to that. But absolutely, we are definitely going to look at the Indian thought. Fortunately, Gita is such a comprehensive work that it actually covers, it's like a compendium, just like Mahabharata. Mahabharata is like compendium of lots of stories of India in the past, which were just compiled together. Similarly, Gita is a lot of Indian philosophy all put together in this short work. So I think we have started in a good place, but thank you. And I'm glad that both you and Penny are loving the Gita. Kevin, what do you think we should do?
I'm looking for like we can do something. For example, today we talk about cognitive related topic. For example, how about 200 years ago, what's people like a common value and thinking? From this Bhagavad Gita, Tao, and Bible. And during the time, what's the change in our mind in the modern days? How can from the timeline as is? That change the kind of, do we have any book or scholars talk about that? Would it be great? Ourselves, we got share the experience like a different culture and knowledge. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that we have done so far is the meetups that we've done with the Center for the Study of Digital Life, where they talk about the scribal age, the oral age, scribal age, print age, electric age, and digital age, and the difference in each of them. All these works that we are studying, Gospel of John, Dao De Jing, and Bhagavad Gita are from the scribal age, which is very integrated, which is like combination, which is when it is experienced, it goes back and forth between writing and speech and conversation. So it is this almost like it has an integrated feel to it, which a lot of the modern works don't have. So it's a very interesting point. The best example, go ahead.
Like that's just one, yeah, the center is good, the mark is great with his, and another guy, I can't remember, yeah, but we got it so many, I would say. That's just one direction we go. And also like today we talk about, the yin and yang and the Dao aspect. It's so many. For example, we from spoken. Also, since we have a language, we treat language as tools. You have tools, you got a limitation. You see, language itself got a limitation. So it's so much, so many aspects to look at things.
Right. No, I absolutely agree with that. What I would say is that we do need to find some work which does a very good job of doing that, so we can use that as a reference point, and then we can talk about it on the top of that. Or that's what I would recommend. So
I'll go to this last point from you. Most meetup, I like your excitement, bring your value to question. So my brain, turn around and see people, inspire myself too. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. One thing that I'm thinking of doing, I'm already doing, is this series on 103 great ideas, where we take ideas. Currently, I'm going through virtues, and I'll continue to do that. Like the next one up, I think I want to do is wisdom. Like, what have people said about wisdom throughout history? This is mostly they focus only on the Western tradition, but luckily we have spent enough time on the Tao and enough time on Bhagavad Gita that we would be able to integrate those things with it as well. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking of. Let's see. Does anybody else? What about JP? JP, what about you? What would you like to see?
Oh, my picture here. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I thought you were just picking people who put the exclamation points down. One of the things I'm doing in the different chats I go to, I've developed a strong psychic sense, ESP, and a lot of what I'm doing is kind of an ethical and a methodological way of looking at things. Restudying the Tao lately after my psychic sense got extreme. I find that some of what's written in there almost seems to come from somebody who was psychic. I've reread Nietzsche, who was against this, but he was one of the most greatest psychic speakers as to what he went through, that I'm learning all these different ways of understanding people on a greater universal connection than I have before. So the Bhagavad Gita and all these other talks I go through, whatever it is, I know I'm going to learn from everybody, because everybody has so much information, and you hear me just going on chatting. My energy sometimes kicks in, I get my Asperger's and I start talking, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Whatever ideas you may have, you can always, folks, you can always write to me at 52livingideas@gmail.com. So if it's just 52livingideas@gmail.com, and I'm happy to consider any ideas. Does anybody else want to put anything out? Brian, go ahead.
Penny has something.
Penny.
Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe you've done this before, but I would be interested in, Buddhism or something maybe by the Dalai Lama.
Okay, you know what? That is very, very good suggestion, because that's one thing that I had. I had two things in terms of kind of completing the picture of, kind of continuing this, India and China and Gospel of John. There are two kind of large things that I think we could do. One is Buddhism, something on Buddhism, okay? Because it is different enough from Hinduism. It was interesting. I was talking to my friend Yasuhiko, and he made a very interesting comment. Now, I had never really thought of it, because I knew that Buddhism is one of the largest exports of idea from one large culture to another. Like Buddhism was born in India, then it went to China and the East and really took off there. It didn't really take off in India, but it took off over there. And I know that, but Yasuhiko had a very interesting explanation of that the Hindu mind is very much metaphysical. It is focused on what is, it's focused on being. Whereas Buddha's thought is all about becoming. And the Eastern thought is very much focused on becoming. You can see that in the kind of the play between yin and yang. You can see it all over the place in the Tao. And that's why Buddhism really took root and transformed itself. And it has all kinds of different forms. Like when it went to Japan, you have the Zen Buddhism. So folks, I don't know much about Buddhism, and there are many people here who do. What would you pick if you had to pick something on Buddhism? I want something which is older and foundational in Buddhism. So what would you guys recommend? Go ahead and type a exclamation mark. We'll start with Margarita, followed by Madeline. Margarita, what would you pick?
I don't know much, but there are a couple of things that perhaps I was exposed with.
Mm-hmm.
Prajna Paramita is quite famous in Indonesia. People read about this, even though we're not Buddhists. And also Zen Buddhism is quite really nice, really great, I think.
Very good. Let's see. Aman, what do you think?
I think every time I get interested in Taoism, I get funneled back to Buddhism. I've had to take a lot of courses on Buddhism. The Tripitaka, which is the Buddhist canon, is probably the most seminal text. But if you
a little more digestible, something like the Teachings of the Buddha, which is a condensed, simplified version. But in the chat, we were discussing Tibetan Buddhism as a unique subset would be quite interesting. It's an often neglected facet of Buddhism or sect of Buddhism. And what is particularly interesting is not just how it incorporates indigenous Tibetan beliefs of like the Bun, but also how much influence there is from the West through the conquering of Alexander the Great. You get some Hellenistic elements within Tibetan Buddhism that make it unique amongst types of Buddhism. So even the Book of the Dead would be a good example of that. You could certainly, if it decides to be a thing, I could put together a reading list.
Oh, absolutely. Aman, if you could just send me the reading list, I will start looking at it because I'm going to do it for sure. It's just a question of when.
I'll put together some sort of, I'll put together a primer Buddhism reading list, and then I will put together something specific to Tibetan Buddhism if that becomes an interest.
Wonderful, wonderful, great, thank you.
But don't hold me to a timeline.
I'm not holding you to the timeline. If you can just, so whenever you want.
When we're finished with the Dao De Jing, in Zeno's paradox time, that'll probably be around retirement for me.
Yes, yes. And if it starts backwards, then it will be, maybe you. I think you got a grandkid, right?
I have one on the way in August, a grandson.
Okay, so by the time he grows up, we'll be ready.
Yes.
Next up, we're going to go with Elena, followed by Brian. Elena, what should we do on Buddhism?
I vote, and first of all, let me tell you, Shrikant, it's a great summary of Buddhism becoming, Western religion becoming, and Hinduism being and present. Perfect. And thank you. And I vote for Zen Buddhism and specifically paradoxical phrases of koan. That's where I am right now. So that's what I'm voting for.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Elena. I will have more to say about that because that brings me to the second thing that I want to add at a very high level. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Madeline. Brian.
So I've read several Buddhist texts and things about the Buddha. This, I think, is the best short. It was published in Rangoon in 1907.
Mm-hmm.
And it was translated into German and then into English. It was reprinted in 2015. It's very good, very, very good text. The Word of the Buddha. Goes back and tries to summarize some of the very original sutras, and I think it does a great job. If very brief, still presents it in an authentic fashion. Doesn't get into a lot of the philosophical, metaphysical stuff. You can add that, like those sort of speculations. Those could go on a very long time. This is, I think, the best introduction I've read.
Okay, I mean that's a very strong. I also like its size.
Yeah, 47 pages.
Yes, and also like the fact that it is 1907, so it is out of the copyright. So there will be versions floating around on the internet that we can quickly look up and see. So maybe I will look at that. Has it been a popular work in the sense that has it had tremendous impact?
Yes, it would not have been reprinted if it didn't in 2015.
Okay.
And it's been translated into different languages.
Okay, wonderful. I will check that out. I have it down. All right, next up is going to be Madeline.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. It's great that you do this and you're soliciting people's suggestions. I thought I would just weigh in on Aman's suggestion of Tibetan Buddhism. Zen is, I think, a fairly not practiced by most Buddhists. And Tibetan Buddhism would also, I think it would lend itself, I think we could use this format for it incredibly well because it's so rich in imagery. You know, so many wonderful demons and gods and realms and all sorts of things like that. It would be fantastic on screen to see those while we discuss them and how they represent our inner states or not. And also the Bon, those were the, like the pre-Buddhist animist religion that got carried over into Tibetan Buddhism. So sort of like Thai forest Buddhism integrates some of their original forest spirits. Spirits of the land. Okay, that's what I was trying to say. So I think it would be fascinating to see this kind of syncretic thing, and also to learn about it, the history of it, and also as it's practiced now. And maybe it would be a way that we could learn about Buddhism that's very visual, not just, you know, pictures of the Buddha, but lots of other things. And there is that museum here in New York. I can't think of it at the moment. I'm sure you know what it is. Yes. And in Chelsea, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so they might have some resources too.
Yes, yes. I actually have attended several meetups there from a Buddhist group that meets there in that museum on that one day where it is free. So I will talk to the folks from that Buddhist group as well to see what suggestions that they have, because it's an old group, a large group, which has actually gone through many Buddhist texts, and there will be many people there who will have feedback on that. So Kevin, you recommend Heart Sutra, right?
Yeah, I agree. Same to Margarita.
Okay, wonderful.
Short.
Right.
Also,
The
yeah.
other big area that I was looking at was Japanese thought. And again, this is Yasuhiko's observation. The observation that he had, Joe, go ahead.
Wabi-sabi, like even the concepts, like I think that would be a great meetup. It may be a one-off, but there's that would be something that I would really like to explore.
What was that? I didn't get that.
Wabi-sabi.
Okay, I'm not familiar. Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's an artistic or aesthetic concept of sorrowful joy and or the appreciation of it's a very strictly Japanese idea that we don't really have a equivalency to in the West, but when you've seen it enough times, you can recognize it.
Wow.
Margarita's recommendation of the Akakaji is also one of the central texts of Shintoism.
Okay. All right. The reason I'm really intrigued by Japanese is one observation that Yasuhiko made. He was saying that the West, all the Western languages, all the Indian languages, and Mandarin and Chinese languages are all left-brained, whereas Polynesian and Japanese language is right-brained. So it operates very differently. Now, I am very intrigued by that observation. And Yasuhiko is a very careful thinker, and he doesn't make kind of, hand-waving observations. And he is from Japan, and he knows Japanese. He has translated Dao De Jing. He's extremely good at English. He's spent time studying Sanskrit and Indian thought. So he knows what he's talking about. And it would be really interesting to see that. So if there is something to it, and I'm sure there is, I would like to pick something old from Japanese to go through. Now, this Ikigai, how can, Amon, do you know a little bit about Ikigai? How old is it?
It's a collection of stories, and it also has some of the mythology of origin of traditional China. So you would get acquainted with, oh, my brain just blanked, the Japanese sun goddess, who is the predecessor of the current emperor. Anyone knows the name, please chime in. I'm just totally blanking at the moment, but that religion is ubiquitous to Chinese culture from inception to current, and it has a very interesting interplay with the transplant religions that enter into Japan, such as Buddhism, so that you get a really curious hybridism. There's some terrifying stories in there too. That they read like horror stories. You get to understand where Japanese horror gets its inception.
All right, definitely. I'm going to look into that. So we have so many different things to look at. So far I have the following ones: Harry Potter, Divine Feminine, Nassim Taleb, Ray Dalio, Mental Models, the Zhuangzi, Neo-Daoism, Ge Hong, Improv, then Buddhism, something on Japanese culture. These are some of the things. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put in the Heart Sutra. I refer to, people mention that some Confucius that's the one I would say the post called 龙语 Analects. It's a factor East Asia culture. I would say our South Asia culture maybe that's like a building.
Absolutely.
And along with Dao, it's people practice and value that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely want to do at least an introductory meetup on Analects, because I don't think study of Chinese thought can be complete without Taoism and Confucius.
It's much easier than a Dao.
Yes, I'm actually listening to it right now. I'm about 40% of the way in, so I'm really looking forward to finishing that. And
you listen to Analect?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm about, yeah. I found like LibriVox recording, which is about 3.5 hours. I think I'm 2 hours into it. So all right, very good. Let me go ahead. This is a starter list. That was quick, Aman. This is long before your grandchildren start coming to the meetups.
Reversed Zeno's paradox. And like I said, I had to take I took 6 Buddhism courses because every time I wanted Taoism in school, they were like, we don't have it, but we have this course on Buddhism we'll sign you up for.
All right, wonderful, folks. So thank you so much for all the suggestions. And for those who are not, if I strongly recommend our Gita meetups. There's something really magical happening there. We're doing it on Thursdays and Fridays. If you are interested in poetry, I would recommend the poetry meetups extremely highly. If you're not interested in poetry, that is a way to learn about what poetry can do. I had never tried to write poems before, and today was the first day I was trying to do it, and it's well worth it, because what it does is that it allows you to think of things which are hard to think about, because it kind of lets you, it's a little bit looser format than exactly saying, this is what I mean. You can use metaphors around to describe that. And especially when you're trying to do something like the Om or trying to describe Tao, it is better to use poetry. If poetry is far more effective. Joe, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was saying goodbye to Mon.
Okay. All right. All right.
Sorry,
Folks.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. So that's what is going on. And thank you very much, everybody. We will see you tomorrow. Sanjay is going to be here talking about neuroscience. Thursday and Friday, we're doing Gita. And then on Sunday, Mark is going to be back, and he's going to be talking about subsidiaries, some very interesting topic which escapes my mind. It's at 3 o'clock. And I'm doing an in-person meetup in New York at the instigation of Chase. So if you're in New York, you're welcome to come. That's going to be on Seneca and on Providence.
Oh, wow.
So I'm trying it out, and let's see how that goes. So thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.